So I really like this guy, exurb1a, because Buddhism is out there, man.
Morning comes and you wake. Your first awareness is of boundless misery. You long for some kind of caffeinated beverage so you can be miserable faster. You exit your
Caffeine does make you pretty miserable. I hate caffeine. Not good for you.
place of dwelling and enter the beverage establishment a few streets down. Coffee please, you say to the barista. Milk or no milk, they ask. Milk please, you say. Colombian or Brazilian beans? Colombian, you say? It really doesn't matter. Northern or Southern Colombia? Really? I don't mind. I don't mind. Good choice. Now, beans that grow at 3,000 or 4,000 feet. What difference does... I don't care. I don't care. Well, there are at least 15,000 growers in that region. I really don't mind. Would you prefer your grower likes or dislikes rappers whose names begin with the prefix Lil? What? Lil Pump, for example. What? I don't give a shit. Lil Yachty? Lil Uzi Vert? Lil Chair? Lil...
Okay.
Table. Lil Dachshund. Lil Harpsichord. Lil Tokamak Nuclear Fusion Reactor. Well, Buddhists believe that is the human condition. Sort of. A perpetual cycle of chasing after contentment and ultimately receiving only dissatisfaction. This dissatisfaction is called dukkha, and this game of rebirthing over and over into dissatisfaction happens in samsara, which is where we live, apparently. And the idea is we stay in samsara, living, learning, dying, being reborn, until we hopefully attain enlightenment. But what's enlightenment? How is wisdom achieved? What in the sweet bejesus is going on with giraffes' tongues? No, but seriously, look at that. And that. And just... It's been a weird year. Well, for all of that, we'll need to talk about the big man himself.
I feel like I'm taking drugs watching this guy. It's so weird.
Siddhartha Gautama, who you will shortly recognize from his stage name, the Buddha. We begin in Nepal about 2,500 years ago. Siddhartha Gautama is born into a Kushi royal family, and trying to be nice, Siddhartha's dad shields him from the nasty things in life and keeps him in a massive to be nice.
This dude like getting whipped? Is that what's going on here?
Siddhartha's dad shields him from the nasty things in life and keeps him in a massive palace. Until, at 29 years old, on a rare jaunt outside the palace, Siddhartha notices people who are like way sick and like way old and like way dead, and realizes, as my climber friends insist on informing me, the universe is a pretty gnarly place, bro. So, soon after, he leaves his kingdom and sets off in search of a way to rid the world of suffering. It's a long story, but finally Siddhartha sits under a tree, determining that he will not get up again until he has realized the true nature of mind. The demon Mara approaches him and tries to lure Siddhartha away from enlightenment with distraction and lust, but Siddhartha is like, I'm busy, cheers, and indeed becomes enlightened and attains nirvana. Nirvana literally meaning to blow out, to extinguish. We'll get to it in a bit, but it was then that Siddhartha became the Buddha, or literally the awakened one, because he was now free of the three great poisons,
like
delusion, greed,
soundtrack
and hate.
to this.
So one would imagine he was, as my climber friends like to say, pretty stoked, bro. And on your marks, get set, Buddhism, a world religion, is born. Oh yeah, the slightly tubby smiling guy you might have seen little statue.
On your mark, get set, Buddhism. Why?
Duets of, yeah, that's probably not the Buddha, but Budai, a 10th century monk. He's also thought by some to be Maitreya. Who's Maitreya? Okay, this gets wiggly. So Buddhist philosophy is kinda out there, man. And while Buddhists don't really have a creation myth, the universe wasn't spoken or sneezed into being, they do have some fairly trippy ideas about time. Often in Buddhism and Hinduism, cosmic duration is divided into eras called kalpas. When asked how long one type of kalpa was, the Buddha allegedly said the length of time it would take to reduce a mountain 16 by 16 by 16 miles to the size of a seed if you rubbed it with a silk cloth once a century. So a while. Now, in some interpretations, Siddhartha Gautama wasn't the first Buddha to turn up. There have apparently been a bunch before and will apparently be a bunch after, and the next Buddha to turn up in our current era, in our current kalpa, ages from now, is supposed to be Maitreya, represented here, and possibly represented here also by this gentleman. And that's who the little tubby man is, so yeah. After about 45 years of teaching, the Buddha died in 483 BCE.
Sounds about right. That's what I did before watching this video.
We'll just jump ahead a bit because I'm bored, and 2 millennia later and Buddhism has fractured into a bunch of different schools. One is Tibetan Buddhism, and this next cheerful bald gentleman is of course the current Dalai Lama. It's tempting to think
Isn't he the guy that... Wait, did he like wanted a kid to like lick his tongue or something? I don't know. That was weird.
of the Dalai Lama as the Pope of Buddhism, and kinda, but the real Pope isn't the head of Christianity, just the Catholic Church. And the Dalai Lama isn't the head of Buddhism, he's the spiritual leader of Tibetan Buddhism. Dalai Lamas aren't elected, they're found. When a Dalai Lama dies, the High Lamas leave it a while, then go looking for the child the deceased Dalai Lama has apparently reincarnated as. Then, once confirmed, the child is taken off to Lhasa, the capital of Tibet, to begin the process of learning to become the Dalai Lama again. The first Dalai Lama was born about 700 years ago and rose from a poor child born in a cattle pen to become one of the most respected teachers in Central Asia, and is rumored to have attained Buddhahood, then did a spot of the old dying. Then came Dalai Lama II, Electric Buddhaloo. At the age of 4, a child in the Tsang region of Tibet declares, "Mum, Dad, I am in fact the Dalai Lama and I'd like to see my monks again," and is confirmed as the first reincarnation of the Dalai Lama. He has a good run and dies in meditation at the age of 67. His reincarnation is found just a few years later, and so on, up until the 6th Dalai Lama. So this is a weird one. Due to events too finicky to go into, the 6th incarnation was recognized as the Dalai Lama a bit late, around the age of 15. A few years later though, when it got time to take his full vows, he refused, and it was not uncommon to see him staggering drunk around Lhasa and visiting brothels for some scripture and chill, maybe. He also wrote some romantic and kinda sometimes kinky poetry. "If I could meditate as deeply on the sacred texts as I do on you, I would clearly be enlightened in this lifetime." As in, school is cool, but baby, for you, I got it bad. As we discussed, Tibetan Buddhism is just one branch of many, but across all the various schools of Buddhism, Mahayana, Theravada, and so on, there are some pillars that are just universally agreed upon. To begin with, there are the 4 noble truths, which are: 1. Existing is a bit crap, namely full of dukkha, dissatisfaction.
You're not wrong there.
To be is to want. To want is to eventually be dissatisfied. We grasp for things, monies, funnies, feline tummies. Sometimes we get them, then we just keep
I can get into this whole Buddha thing.
grasping for more. 2. The cause of suffering is craving. Wanting is the problem, Buddhists claim. Nothing, not mansions, not games that aren't buggy on release, can ever be so satisfying they kill desire. Desire is the problem because it never ends. 3. The end of suffering comes with the end of desire, the end of grasping, the end of craving. The way out of the forest of suffering is not to pound down cheeseburgers and gold leaf vodka.
I guess I'm just gonna keep reliving life and playing video games forever. Crap life, I know. Can't help it.
Until every desire is gone, but to extinguish the flame of desire itself. To quote a famous line, "Let go or be dragged." And finally, 4. Everything will apparently be alright if you follow the Eightfold Path, which is basically CrossFit for Buddhists. And if I can think of any theologically appropriate jokes, maybe we'll get to it, but time is short and I'm an alcoholic, not an educator. And while we're at it, how about we do the 3 marks of existence, the 3 constants of being alive. The first mark of existence is dukkha, dissatisfaction. But we've done this one already, and I hope you're listening because there will be a test at the end. The second is anicca or anicca, basically impermanence. Reality, according to Buddhism, is a transient, ever-changing thing. Oh, you might reply, such a revelation, much deep. What next? Fire is hot, blobfish are gross. Well, actually, blobfish aren't gross, incidentally. Thank you. If you keep seeing this image around, that's a blobfish when it's pulled out of the water. Normally, blobfish prefer to stay at between 2,000 and 4,000 feet in the ocean where they look like reasonable fish. They look like that because we yank them out of the water. And it's one thing that we have the audacity to trawl them out of the ocean in the first place, but it's quite another to malign their appearance by pretending that's what they actually look like, because they don't. Much like if a huge hook came down and pulled one of us into space, and aliens just sat around chuckling at our vacuum-frozen, nitrogen-swollen corpses going, "Well, humans aren't very pretty after all." Anyway, chaps, how about an antimatter brewski? Stop it! Leave blobfish alone. Excuse me. Reality to our Buddhist friends is a formless swirling dance of is. From the entropic decaying galaxies to the tide-eroded rocks of the beach. All is flux, all is change, and you will die. But so will I, so it's alright. Our inability to accept anicca, to accept that
I don't know how that makes it alright. I'm gonna die, but he's also gonna die, so that's cool. What? I mean, sure. We're gonna die. Nothing we can do about it. Don't really want to, but it's just the way it's gonna be.
everything is impermanent is apparently a large source of our dukkha, of our suffering. And because we refuse to accept change, we cling to illusions of permanence. We cling to the stories we tell ourselves about ourselves and to the fleeting forms of the world. And on that note, let me tell you what a pleasure it is to live in one's third decade of life, when you can still enjoy not just the persistent facial acne you thought would go away over a decade ago, but at the very same time begin to notice grey hairs popping up and say hi, while you stare at yourself helplessly in the bathroom mirror feeling 19 again and simultaneously 90-fucking-9.
That's probably gonna happen one day. I'll be 50 years old and be like, bro, I'm still that fucking 20-year-old kid, but I look old now.
The third mark of existence is called anatta, and it's, well, you know, months ago I came down with a cheeky spot of the old you-know-what virus. I'm fine, thanks for not asking, and trapped indoors for weeks.
I'm not 20, I'm 27.
And almost
or 32.
Terminally bored, I became quite...
Or am I 24? No, I'm actually 29.
massively addicted to a game called
Or am I?
Salem, which no one is paying me to tell you about, I just kinda liked it. So, very briefly, you're assigned a random role at the beginning of the game. You might be a member of the town, as in the goodies, or the baddies, the witch, for example. Basically the card game mafia! Anyway, you don't have to play long before you start noticing that whenever you're assigned as a goodie, you sort of automatically hate the evil players for being so deceptive. And then again, when you're evil, you can't stand all those life-affirming do-gooder morons. And you start to have this creeping suspicion that quite a lot of what goes on in our gelatinous meat computers is kind of context dependent, because just as in the game, in life we're assigned roles we have to play, of course: student, employee, spouse, scripted pretentious know-it-all online, etc. And like in the game, sometimes it's hard to tell where the roles stop and our genuine personalities begin. And the Buddhist answer to this is that it's not just the world that's impermanent, but ourselves in it. Our outer identities are shifting all the time, of course, and that's just the external stuff. On the inside of our minds, it's even more mental. In watching the interior of one's own mind,
well, no
it's
shit.
all sense data and
I like
thoughts,
the analogy.
irate, happy, bored, excited, whatever.
Whatever it
but
is,
in not one
metaphor.
of those
Who knows?
sensations or thoughts will one find an I, a me. Obviously, something is doing the experiencing, but it doesn't appear to have a middle we can grasp or catch sight of. To bastardize a famous Buddhist story, if someone asked you to show them a plane, and you did, the ailerons and the rudder and the engines, and they said, yes, yes, but where's the plane though? You'd think that person was a few fries short of a Happy Meal, because a plane is just the sum of its parts. It's a bit like that with us, our Buddhist friends say. There is no amount of clinging to our names, to our careers, to the constant white noise of nonsense thoughts inside by which we will catch sight of a tangible me, of an I. And that, in a very botched way, is the third mark of existence, anatta. We're clearly conscious, but our consciousness in Buddhism doesn't have a center, not in time, not in mental space. Our mental selves are constantly in flux, ever-changing, ever-impermanent. There is a bit of a similar sentiment in the sciencey cosmological tradition that we are star stuff, that underneath the complex recursive storytelling machinery of our brains, I am X years old, I am X feet high in X century, I am I. Beneath those stories there is biology, and beneath that is chemistry, and beneath that is a unity of physics and deep time that everything is made from. We were once these, then these, in a while we will be these, but we were always this and will always be this. The idea is that our identities are incidental, and clinging to them over the majesty of the universe is wicked silly. There is no magical line between baby and us now that we can point to and say, and then I became me. It isn't so much that we can't step in the same river twice, but with the entire world in flux, with us in flux, it's that we can't even step in the same river once. In the Dhammapada, the sayings of the Buddha, there's the line,
What is this doing to my brain?
Though one may conquer 1,000 times 1,000 men in battle, yet he indeed is the noblest victor who conquers himself. Or herself, obviously. Mastery of the self. It's a neat idea, and boy do we seem a long way off from that one. Just daily life is weird enough. Bound without security, lost without adventure, wandering quietly confused for years through the strange cityscapes of the 21st century, trying to find yourself in it, in any of it, trying to find the naive happiness of childhood once again. And is this what life is now, you think? Little bursts of euphoria a few times a year, drug-induced or chance-induced, then back to the uniform grey of a day you won't remember. And if you should ever stick your head up above the parapet to ask, "Excuse me, is this all there is?" then only to be told to shut up and just get on with it. All the while knowing that a star died to make you and you no longer find romance in that. All the while being surrounded by miraculous technology and you no longer find romance in that. The absurd ever-drama of just trying to be okay. And the game gets faster, and the game gets harder. More gadgets, more screens, more patches, and non-stick frying pans, and fiber broadband, and ultrasonic fucking toothbrushes. And thank you for your application, but... And sorry to hear you're feeling sad, but... And we did everything we could, but... Please God make me a stone. I promised myself I'd be more than this. I promised others I'd be more than this. Alive and not quite living, deathly not quite dead. And all the while rages the inner battle. The great quiet attempt to fix oneself. And knowing no one else can do it for you. And that battle is hardly limited to the individual. Our entire civilization is engaged in it too. On the 28th of January 1986, an O-ring failure led to the Space Shuttle Challenger exploding about 72 seconds into launch, killing all 7 aboard. It was horrific.
Wasn't one of those passengers a teacher? And like the students were watching? And they were like, "Yeah, my teacher's up there." Oh, no. Now kids ain't got no teacher. I gotta get a new one. I bet they were out of school for a while after that.
Horrific. Later, news anchor Tom Brackall would say of the accident, "The American public will be demanding some difficult answers, and of course, we'll all have to examine what it is that we want from this era of high technology." Those words were said almost 40 years ago now, but they couldn't be truer still today, because it's a fairly weird age to live in at the moment. Watching the human race attempting to protect itself from itself, like a teenager, all mood swings, all experimenting with new ideologies, all smashing up mum's car and refusing to apologize. In the last 30 years, about 1 billion people have been lifted out of extreme poverty, which is incredible, obviously. But as it stands in 2021, currently 2 in 3 humans still live on below $10 a
It is not 2021. You crazy? It's 2023.
day, and 1 in 10 on less than $2 a day. Not to mention the 800 million people who currently don't have access to safe drinking water, plus the about 14,000 kids under 5 who are dying preventable deaths every day, all of which we will all no doubt agree is fucking bullshit. And on top of that, about 800,000 people, or 1 Copenhagen, take their own lives every year, and it's the 10th leading cause of death in the US alone. If there was a day, just one day every century, when we all got together to hash out what our goals actually are as a species, like top 5 to-dos for Homo sapiens in the next 100 years, cheeky trip to nearest star system, it's on there for sure. Making it a UN human rights violation to start a Tinder conversation with a single smiley face, on the list, definitely. But try to make sure everyone's doing cool and like eating and stuff, no one in their right mind would put that below number 1. Followed closely behind by number 2, when everyone's eating and stuff, let's all work out how to be happy, or at least not living on the edge of existential despair.
I don't think that'll ever happen. I think it's just constantly a pendulum swinging back and forth. There'll be good times, there'll be bad times.
Yet he indeed is the noblest victor who conquers
Until it all
himself.
ends, most
Or
likely
rather,
in fire.
If we make it to the distant future where we have warp
And
drives
war.
and free energy or whatever, and at the very same time hundreds of millions of us are still living in extreme poverty, that isn't Star Trek, that's fucking Blade Runner. And except
Yeah.
for flying cars and cool clothes, we really don't want Blade Runner. The upside of all
No.
of this, of course,
Not Blade Runner, bad.
is that it is a choice, and human problems can be solved by human beings. In the words of the much-missed David Graeber, the ultimate hidden truth of the world is that it is something that we make, and could just as easily make differently. things could be a whole lot worse. Things could be a whole lot better. Anyway, this has not been an attempt to convert anyone to Buddhism. I'm not a Buddhist. I'm barely a person. But as an ideology, Buddhism has in part probably persisted for over 2 millennia now, because it points directly to questions that are just as relevant today as they were 2 millennia ago. Namely, how can we overcome suffering? Why are we always fighting our own stupid nature? And what actually are we? And the answer to a lot of that, Buddhism says, rather uniquely, is not up into the big transcendent, but down into the acceptance of the impermanence of the world and into the murk of our messy nature. That liberation, salvation, whatever we call it, is waiting inside. The way out is down. And as we head deeper into potentially the most dangerous century in human history, this battle of trying to regulate our bizarre prehistoric tendencies might determine whether we come out the other side of this century. Because we're getting wicked technological, but like, are we much wiser for it? You probably know the Kardashev scale already. It's basically a litmus test for categorizing how advanced civilizations could become. So a type 1 civilization could utilize
I think the Kardashev scale is wrong. Because I don't think that it's different steps. I think you can skip around and you can even go back. And you still be technologically advanced, but you're basically like cavemen. Kind of like, if you've ever seen Warcraft, I've never actually played the Warcraft games very much, but if you've ever seen Warcraft, the orcs come to their world, to the world of the like people through portals, but they were still basically tribal, living in villages in the woods and eating each other and stuff like that. So I don't really think the Kardashev scale is correct.
All the energy available on its home planet, a Type 2 civilization, all the energy available in its solar system, and a Type 3 civilization, all the energy available in its galaxy. And that's all well and good, but the Kardashev scale measures a civilization's success by its energy consumption.
Yep.
So we could use another metric, wisdom. A Type 1 wisdom civilization could have progressed to a state where no one goes hungry, where no one needlessly dies of easily curable diseases, and everyone has at least the same starting conditions universally
I don't
on
think
which
that
to
it would
try
get
and
to
build
that.
a life. Type 2 might be a civilization where no one has to involuntarily suffer from physical or mental maladies, from chronic pain, from anxiety, etc. Maybe where we stop
Definitely not
inflicting
getting to that.
industrial scale harm on our animal mates and keeping them in horrific conditions. But rant over, I won't go on about it. And Type 3, a civilization where human, animal, sentient toaster, whatever, doesn't have to suffer at all. With disease dead, with humankind finally liberated from the evolutionary genetic shackles that have been tied around our legs for millennia.
When we're dead and new Earth is created.
And if we finally arrive at that party at the end of time, as actual adults at last, as technological bodhisattvas, as masters of our own destiny, we'll hopefully spend at least a little while marveling at just how miraculous it was that we managed to live through an era in which we could land robots on other planets and simultaneously still didn't quite know how to be happy or properly take care of all the human family yet. And if we make it to that party, together as a species, that would be way cool, yo. I'm hella stoked for that, yo. I trust you are too, yo. But until then. Well, until then. So, until then. And until then. And until then. And until then.
Anything else for me? You gonna tell me to subscribe? Come on, tell me to subscribe. Nope. Well, that was fun and weird. Now I know a little bit more about Buddhism, I think. I'm not a Buddhist. I do think that they were on to some really trippy ideas that are probably true. But a lot of it's just kind of like, how would you even know if any of this is real? You're just kind of basing it off of other things that you could already confirm to yourself. So yeah, Buddhism is kind of out there, man.